The recreation district of Crossroads Station hummed with the peculiar energy of 1,000 different species trying to relax in their own ways. Neon signs flickered in colors that spanned spectrums beyond human vision, advertising entertainments both familiar and bizarre. Sarah Chen walked through the crowded concourse with her hands in the pockets of her merchant marine jacket, grateful for 48 hours of freedom, while the wandering star underwent its scheduled maintenance. She had no particular destination in mind. Her crewmates had scattered to their preferred diversions, Captain Rodriguez to visit an old friend, Jenkins to some kind of zero-gravity sports complex, Maya to a botanical garden featuring plants from 30 different worlds. Sarah had considered the garden but found herself drawn instead to the sounds of excitement echoing from an establishment called the Strategy Sanctum. The café was larger than it appeared from the outside, with high ceilings and multiple levels connected by ramps designed to accommodate various species' mobility needs. But what caught Sarah's attention immediately was the center of the main floor, where a holographic battlefield materialized in brilliant detail above a circular platform. Around it, a crowd of perhaps 40 aliens pressed close, watching with rapt attention. Sarah worked her way to the edge of the crowd. The holographic display showed rolling hills rendered in perfect miniature, a river cutting through the landscape, forests of trees no larger than her finger. On opposite sides of the battlefield, two armies faced each other, hundreds of tiny soldiers arranged in precise formations, their armor glinting in the simulated sunlight. Two players stood at command interfaces on opposite sides of the platform. One was a Grath, a bear-like species known for their methodical thinking and engineering prowess. The other was a Vrynn, and Sarah found herself staring despite knowing it was rude. She had never seen one of the Vrynn up close before. The female officer, for the uniform markings made her military status clear, stood nearly 7 feet tall, her posture perfectly erect. Beneath translucent skin, Sarah could see the faint crystalline structure of her bones, giving her an ethereal, almost luminous quality. Her eyes were large and dark, her features angular and elegant. Everything about her suggested refined nobility, from her precisely groomed appearance to the calm confidence in her movements. Sarah watched as the Vrynn officer executed a series of commands with practiced ease. Her holographic army moved in response, cavalry wheeling in perfect unison, infantry advancing in locked formations. The Grath player attempted a flanking maneuver, but the Vrynn had already anticipated it. Within minutes, the Grath's forces were systematically dismantled, trapped between converging elements of the Vrynn's army. The game ended with a harmonious chime. The Grath player made a gesture of respect, which the Vrynn returned with graceful precision. The crowd offered appreciative sounds, clicks, hums, and other species-specific expressions of approval. Sarah stayed where she was as the crowd began to disperse. She studied the now-empty battlefield, her mind already analyzing what she had seen. The tactical framework was fascinating. It reminded her of pike and shot warfare from Earth's Renaissance period, with elements of earlier medieval formations. The game clearly valued organization and discipline, with units moving in coordinated blocks rather than as individuals. But the strategies employed had been predictable. The Vrynn officer had won through superior execution of standard tactics, not through innovation. Every move had been textbook perfect, which meant every move had been, in its way, telegraphed. Interesting defensive formations, Sarah murmured to herself, not realizing she had spoken aloud, but predictable attack patterns. The cavalry commitment in the center was visible 3 moves ahead. You observed the weakness in my crystalline spear opening. Sarah jumped slightly and turned to find the Vrynn officer standing beside her. Up close, the alien was even more striking, her dark eyes fixed on Sarah with evident curiosity. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to criticize," Sarah said quickly. "You were clearly the better player, I was just thinking out loud." "No apology is necessary. I am Commander S.H. Lara of the Vrynn Empire, currently assigned to the diplomatic vessel Eternal Vigil." She performed a slight bow. "And you are human, yes. I have not had many opportunities to speak with your species." Sarah Chen. "I'm a navigator on a merchant freighter." Sarah found herself returning the bow awkwardly. And yes, human, I'm surprised you noticed the cavalry thing. Most people don't see me watching. Most people are not trained in strategic observation. Lara gestured toward the holographic platform. You play tactical cascade. I've never heard of it before today, but I love strategy games. Sarah hesitated, then added, I grew up playing chess, all sorts of historical war games with my grandfather. He was a military historian. Lara's expression, difficult for Sarah to read given the differences in species, seemed to register interest. Then perhaps you would enjoy learning tactical cascade. It is considered the finest test of strategic thinking in the known galaxy. I would be honored to teach you the basics. Before Sarah could respond, another Vrynn approached, shorter than Lara and wearing a slightly different uniform. Commander, you cannot be serious. Teaching the game is one thing, but perhaps we should make this interesting. An exhibition match. Lara considered this. Lieutenant Vrynn, that seems excessive for a first-time player. Then make it a teaching demonstration, Vrynn suggested. Show the techniques while playing. I am certain our human friend would not object to such a learning experience. Sarah should have recognized the setup for what it was, but she was too intrigued by the game itself to think about implications. I'd love to try if Commander Lara doesn't mind. I'm a quick learner. Very well. Lara moved toward the platform. Let us see what a human mind makes of Vrynn strategy. Within minutes, word had spread through the strategy sanctum. A human was going to play tactical cascade against Commander Lara. This was novel enough to draw a crowd. Aliens began filtering back into the café, taking positions around the platform. Sarah recognized several species, Grath, Zenith, a few krill, others she could only guess at. By the time they were ready to begin, at least 60 observers had gathered. Sarah stood at her command interface, trying not to let nervousness show. The controls were intuitive enough, holographic buttons and sliders that responded to touch, with helpful labels appearing in her neural translator. The battlefield materialized between them, and she studied the terrain carefully. Hills, river, forests. Good defensive positions in the high ground. The river could be a barrier or an avenue depending on how you used it. Standard deployment, Lara explained, her voice carrying to the crowd. 500 units per side, divided into infantry, cavalry, and archers. The objective is to capture your opponent's command center or eliminate their forces entirely. Do you understand? I think so, Sarah said. She began placing her units, initially mimicking formations she had seen in the previous game. Infantry in the center, cavalry on the flanks, archers behind. But as she worked, her grandfather's lessons echoed in her mind. Never commit everything to a single strategy. Always keep reserves. The terrain is your ally. She made a few adjustments, positioning units in ways that wouldn't be obvious to an observer but gave her options for later. Lara deployed with smooth confidence, her forces arranging themselves in what Sarah now recognized as the crystalline spear formation, a powerful center thrust with protected flanks. It was elegant and clearly optimized through generations of gameplay. The game began. For the first dozen moves, Sarah played cautiously, learning the mechanics and testing the boundaries of what the game allowed. Units moved at different speeds based on terrain. Archers had range advantages but were vulnerable in close combat. Cavalry was fast but couldn't maintain cohesion in forests. The system had depth, she realized. Real tactical depth. Lara played with patient precision, her forces advancing in coordinated waves. She was clearly holding back, giving Sarah time to learn rather than crushing her immediately. The crowd watched in polite silence, occasionally murmuring at particularly instructive moments. On move 15, Sarah made what appeared to be a mistake. She detached a group of 30 infantry units and sent them on a tangent toward the forest on the eastern edge of the battlefield, not toward any objective, not to reinforce any position. Just away. In the crowd, a Zenith scholar named Dr. Zelmoth leaned toward his companion. Curious. Perhaps the human does not understand unit cohesion. Lara noticed the maneuver but did not exploit it immediately. She continued her methodical advance, bringing her main force to bear against Sarah's center. The human was defending adequately, though her formations were somewhat irregular. Not textbook, but not incompetent. Sarah's main forces engaged SH Lara's center in what looked like a standard defensive battle. She traded units inefficiently, allowing the Vrynn to gain ground. Her cavalry on the right flank retreated when pressed, and her left flank seemed exposed, defended by a thin line of archers. SH Lara felt a moment of disappointment. The human had shown promise in her observations, but in execution she was making elementary errors. Still, this was a learning experience. SH Lara began to maneuver to exploit the exposed left flank, preparing to explain the tactical principle she was demonstrating. On move 34, she committed her cavalry reserve to pursue Sarah's seemingly rooted center forces. The human's units were falling back in disarray, and SH Lara's cavalry could envelope them completely, ending the game in a textbook victory. Then the world turned upside down. Those 30 infantry units that Sarah had sent into the forest, seemingly abandoned, forgotten by most observers, emerged from the tree line directly behind SH Lara's command center. Simultaneously, Sarah's retreating center forces pivoted with sudden coordination and crashed into the flanks of SH Lara's pursuing cavalry. The exposed left flank erupted with hidden archer units that had been using terrain for concealment, raining fire into SH Lara's now vulnerable right side. And those weren't separate attacks. Sarah had somehow timed them to hit simultaneously, from 3 different directions, catching SH Lara's forces while they were extended and committed. SH Lara's fingers flew across her interface, emergency commands overriding her carefully planned advance. She pulled back her forward elements, sacrificed her cavalry to buy time, reformed her infantry into a defensive circle around her command center. Her heart was pounding, a physiological response she had not felt in a game since her early training days. She managed to stabilize, barely. Her cavalry was gone, and she had lost nearly a third of her forces, but her command center was secure, and her remaining units were in defensible positions. The café was no longer silent. Aliens were chattering to each other in a dozen languages, their universal translators creating a babel of confused commentary. What was that? The human laid a trap, but the game does not reward trap tactics. Straightforward strategy is optimal. Then why did it work? SH Lara looked across the battlefield at Sarah Chen. The human was frowning slightly, studying the holographic display with intense concentration. She showed no triumph at her successful ambush, only focus. This was not someone celebrating a lucky break. This was someone executing a plan. An impressive stratagem, SH Lara said, her voice steady despite her racing thoughts. I underestimated you. Sarah glanced up, and for a moment their eyes met. You're very good at this, Sarah said. I'm just playing differently. Yes. SH Lara could see it now in retrospect. Every mistake Sarah had made had been deliberate. The scattered units were not errors but preparation. The inefficient trades were not incompetence but bait. The human had been setting up that ambush from the opening moves. SH Lara felt something she had not experienced in tactical cascade for years: uncertainty. She did not know what Sarah would do next, and that was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She deployed into the eternal diamond formation, 4 interlocking unit groups that supported each other perfectly, a defense that had never been broken in tournament play. If the human wanted to play with traps and deception, SH Lara would show her the power of perfect execution. Sarah studied the formation for a long moment. SH Lara could almost see her analyzing it, looking for weaknesses. There were none. The eternal diamond had been refined over centuries of gameplay. Every angle was covered, every vulnerability protected. Then Sarah attacked it head-on. A mass of infantry and what remained of her cavalry smashed into the front of SH Lara's formation. It was suicide. Sarah was throwing units away against a prepared defense. SH Lara responded automatically, bringing her reserves forward to blunt the attack and then counter it. That was when she noticed the rest of Sarah's forces. They had been moving during the attack slowly, using every scrap of cover the terrain provided. Hills, forests, the river itself. Sarah was using the environment in ways SH Lara had never seen in the game. And now, with SH Lara's reserves committed to stopping the frontal assault, those forces struck, not at the eternal diamond itself, but at the spaces between the four component groups. Sarah had somehow identified the exact points where SH Lara's perfect formation became vulnerable if its elements were isolated. 3 simultaneous attacks, precisely targeted, hitting just as SH Lara's attention was focused on the frontal assault. The eternal diamond shattered. What stratagem is this? SH Lara asked, her voice tight with strain as she tried desperately to reform her forces. I do not recognize the pattern. Sarah responded absently, her attention on her interface. Oh, it's called fire and maneuver, combined arms tactics, basically. Though I'm also using some. What did grandfather call it? Fabian strategy, drawing out your reserves before committing to a decisive engagement. Dr. Zelmoth's voice rose above the crowd noise. She is using multiple strategic frameworks simultaneously. That is not supposed to be possible. Tactical cascade is built on sequential decision-making. But Sarah was not playing tactical cascade the way it was meant to be played. She was playing war. The game had moved beyond anything SH Lara had trained for. They were now roughly equal in force strength. Both had lost units, both had defensive positions, but Sarah had the initiative. SH Lara found herself reacting rather than acting, responding to threats rather than creating them. And then Sarah did something that made SH Lara's skin flush with color, the Vrynn equivalent of blushing, visible through her translucent skin. A small group of Sarah's units, perhaps 20 infantry, began making noise near SH Lara's left flank. They advanced, then retreated, then advanced again. They were not committing to an attack, just threatening, creating uncertainty. SH Lara knew it was a feint, obviously a feint, too small to be a real threat, but she found herself adjusting her defense anyway, shifting units to cover that flank. Better safe than sorry. Then another group did the same thing on her right flank, then a third at her rear. None of them attacked, they just threatened, probed, made her think. SH Lara realized with creeping horror what was happening. The human was not trying to defeat her forces. The human was trying to defeat her mind. Making her doubt, making her second guess, forcing her to see threats in every shadow. It was psychological warfare, and it was working. This is not right, Lieutenant Vikes said from somewhere in the crowd. This is not how the game is played. But Sarah was not playing their game. She was playing something else entirely, something older and darker and infinitely more sophisticated. SH Lara tried to ignore the feints, tried to focus on the actual threats, but doubt had taken root. When Sarah made a genuine attack, SH Lara hesitated a fraction of a second, wondering if it was another deception. That hesitation cost her units. The human was inside her head now, and SH Lara could not get her out. Sarah pressed her advantage. She began using terrain in ways that seemed impossible. A group of her archers set fire to a forested hillside, and when SH Lara's units tried to advance through it, the flames spread. The game's environmental system responded to Sarah's arson by calculating wind direction and fuel load. 30 of SH Lara's infantry burned or were forced to retreat. Later, Sarah used her remaining cavalry to break a riverbank upstream. The game's physics engine, designed to add realism, never expected to be weaponized, calculated water flow and flooding. A valley where SH Lara had positioned reserves became a temporary lake. 50 more units lost without combat. She is treating the battlefield as a living thing, Dr. Zelmoth said quietly. The rest of us treat it as a game board. She treats it as an environment to be exploited. And still Sarah pressed. She used her own units as bait, sacrificing them in ways that seemed wasteful until the trap closed. She withdrew from positions that were defensible because they would become indefensible later. She gave up territory freely because territory meant nothing if your enemy could not hold it. SH Lara felt like she was fighting a ghost. Every time she thought she understood Sarah's position, the human would be somewhere else. Every time she prepared for an attack, it came from a different direction. They were now equal in forces, both down to around 200 units, but SH Lara's were scattered and demoralized while Sarah's were concentrated and mobile. The human had been steadily compressing SH Lara's defensive perimeter, not through overwhelming force but through constant pressure and psychological exhaustion. SH Lara made a decision. She could not win this way. Defense was death against this opponent. She had to attack. She abandoned her command center. It was a desperate gamble but tactically sound. SH Lara pulled her command unit, the small group of officers that represented herself in the game, and gave them an escort of 50 of her best remaining units. Then she launched every other unit she had in an all-out assault on Sarah's command center. If she could take Sarah's center before her own fell, she would win. And Sarah's defenses, while clever, were not infinite. SH Lara's units crashed into them like a wave, trading casualties for ground. Sarah's defensive lines bent, then broke. Vryn's soldiers flooded toward the human command center. SH Lara allowed herself a moment of hope. She was going to win. Unconventionally, desperately, but she was going to win. Then she noticed Sarah's command unit was moving, not to reinforce the defense, not to rally troops. The human had pulled her command staff and was running, retreating across the map with a small honor guard, abandoning her own forces to their fate. SH Lara's remaining forces overran Sarah's command center within minutes. The holographic structure fell, and SH Lara's units began eliminating the abandoned human soldiers. It should have been victory, but Sarah's command unit was still alive, running through terrain SH Lara no longer controlled, circling behind the Vrynn lines. SH Lara understood too late. The objective was not to hold your command center. The objective was to eliminate the enemy's command. Sarah had never cared about the right way to win. She only cared about winning. SH Lara's command center was now defended by perhaps 30 units, all she had left there when she launched her desperate offensive. Sarah's command group, now joined by survivors from her abandoned army, numbered 20. It should not have been enough. But Sarah hit the defensive perimeter from 3 sides simultaneously, using every trick she had demonstrated in the game. Feints, terrain exploitation, concentrated fire at weak points. The defense crumbled. Sarah's commander, her avatar in the game, reached SH Lara's command center with perhaps 10 soldiers remaining. They stormed inside. The holographic display showed close combat, then went dark. A chime sounded and text appeared in the air above the battlefield. Human player, victory. The strategy sanctum was absolutely silent. SH Lara stood frozen, staring at the battlefield. Her hands were shaking, actually shaking, something she had not experienced since her first combat simulation in officer training. She had not just lost. She had been outthought, outmaneuvered, and psychologically dominated by someone who had never played the game before today. She looked across the platform at Sarah Chen. The human was staring at the holographic display with an expression that mixed surprise and satisfaction. Then Sarah looked up and met SH Lara's eyes. "Good game," Sarah said quietly. "You almost had me with that final offensive. If my command center had been stronger, it would have worked." "Where did you learn these tactics?" SH Lara heard herself ask. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. Sarah looked confused. History books. My grandfather taught me about historical battles. Earth history, I mean. Canna, Agincourt, Austerlitz, the Incheon landing, stuff like that." "Why?" Dr. Zelmoth pushed through the crowd. The Zenith was holding a datapad, his multiple eye stalks focused on Sarah with intense interest. "Earth history," he repeated. "You mean these are real tactics, from actual wars?" "Well, yeah." Sarah was starting to look uncomfortable with all the attention. "I mean, the game reminded me of pike and shot warfare mixed with some Napoleonic formations, so I just adapted strategies from." She stopped, finally registering the looks on the aliens' faces. "Wait, do other species not study military history?" What followed was not really a conversation. It was an excavation, a slow unearthing of a truth that none of the aliens present had ever really considered. SH Lara, still processing her defeat, found herself sitting at a table in the corner of the café. Sarah sat across from her, with Dr. Zelmoth beside them and a growing crowd of interested observers forming a loose circle. Lieutenant Vikes stood behind SH Lara, his expression unreadable. "Let me understand this correctly," Dr. Zelmoth said, his multiple eyes focused on his datapad as he spoke. You learned these tactics from studying human history, historical conflicts that actually occurred on your homeworld. Yes, Sarah said. I mean, it's not like I'm a military expert or anything. My grandfather was the historian. I just picked up bits and pieces growing up. He used to make me study famous battles, then we'd play them out on tabletop games or computer simulations. It was how we bonded. Famous battles, S.H. Lara repeated. How many famous battles does human history contain? Sarah shrugged. I don't know, thousands. Tens of thousands if you count smaller engagements. Human history is pretty much just a long series of people fighting each other over resources, territory, religion, ideology, or sometimes just because. The silence that followed was profound. Dr. Zelmoth's eye stalk swiveled to focus entirely on Sarah. The Vrynn have fought 73 ritualized conflicts in the past 5,000 years. The Grath, 12. My own species, the Zenith, have historical records of 91 territorial disputes that escalated to violence over a period of 8,000 years. You are saying humans fought tens of thousands of wars? At least, Sarah said. She was beginning to understand that something significant was being revealed, though she did not yet grasp the full implications. We were fighting pretty much constantly until we developed space travel and made contact with you guys. Even then, it took a few decades to really get all the nations on Earth to agree to stop. A Grath in the crowd spoke up, his voice a deep rumble. We heard about the incident with the Krill raiders near your Sol system. The raiders ambushed 3 human freighters. The humans responded. Oh, that, Sarah nodded. Yeah, the Solar Defense Force tracked the raiders back to their base and eliminated it. That's standard anti-piracy procedure, isn't it? The Krill base was destroyed so thoroughly that investigators could not determine what weapons were used, the Grath said. We assumed it was some kind of new human technology, but it was not technology, was it? It was tactics. Sarah looked uncomfortable. I don't know the details. That was military stuff, and I'm just a merchant navigator. But yeah, humans take piracy seriously. We've been dealing with pirates for thousands of years. We know how to make examples. S.H. Lara finally found her voice. You were not playing tactical cascade. You were playing war. Real war, the kind my species has not fought in 4,000 years. Every species in this room evolved past large-scale warfare millennia ago. We play games like Tactical Cascade to honor our ancestors' warrior traditions, but they were warriors in the way a ceremonial sword is a weapon, beautiful, meaningful, but never truly meant to cut. She stood, her tall form somehow seeming both more and less imposing than before. You honored real warriors, the kind who fought not for honor or ritual but for survival, the kind who used every advantage, every trick, every psychological edge because losing meant death. Sarah stood as well, meeting S.H. Lara's eyes. I'm sorry if I upset you. I didn't mean to. No, S.H. Lara's voice was firm. Do not apologize. You showed me something I needed to see. I challenged you to honor my ancestors who were warriors, but you showed me the difference between warriors and soldiers, between ritual combat and real warfare. I am, she paused, searching for the right word in the human language. I am humbled and grateful. Dr. Zelmoth was still absorbed in his datapad. I have been accessing human databases through the station's network. The scope of human military history is. He looked up, all his eyes wide with something between awe and horror. You have an entire academic field called military science. Millions of scholarly works on the methodology of organized violence. You have studied warfare the way we study physics or biology, as a fundamental force to be understood, predicted, and optimized. We had to, Sarah said quietly. We were good at killing each other, too good. If we didn't study it, try to understand it, find ways to prevent it or at least limit it, we might have destroyed ourselves. That nearly happened a few times. But you did not destroy yourselves, S.H. Lara said. You mastered it instead, mastered warfare so thoroughly that you could choose to step away from it. A merchant from the crowd, a species Sarah did not recognize, spoke up nervously. This is why human freighters always reach their destinations, even through contested space. Why human merchants can operate in regions where others fear to travel. You are not just lucky or well-armed, you think like predators. We're not predators, Sarah protested. We don't want war. Humanity has been peaceful for decades now. We're traders, explorers, scientists, artists. We've moved on. But you remember, Lara said softly. You remember how to fight, how to think like warriors, even though you choose not to. That is something special, something the rest of the galaxy lost when we evolved past conflict. Dr. Zelmoth made a decision. I would like to write a comparative study of human versus galactic strategic thinking. Would you be willing to be interviewed for such a work? I guess, Sarah said. But I'm really not an expert. I'm just someone who likes strategy games. You are someone who carries 5,000 years of warfare in her cultural memory, Dr. Zelmoth corrected. That makes you more expert than anyone else in this room, perhaps more expert than anyone in this sector of space. The crowd was beginning to disperse now, aliens drifting back to their tables or leaving the café entirely. But they were talking among themselves, and Sarah could hear fragments of conversation. Did you see the feint at the end? The way she used the terrain? Humans. They're more complicated than we thought. Lara gestured to an empty table away from the main crowd. Would you join me for a drink? I would like to speak with you more if you are willing. Not about the game, about everything else. They talked for hours. Lieutenant Vikes brought drinks, something called Vrynn crystal tea for Lara, regular earth coffee for Sarah that the café's fabricators managed to produce reasonably well. The crowd eventually cleared out entirely except for Dr. Zelmoth, who remained at a nearby table, absorbed in his research. Sarah explained human history the way her grandfather had taught her, not as a parade of battles and conquests, but as a story of necessity and adaptation. Competing nations on a single planet, limited resources, existential threats both real and perceived. Warfare had shaped human development in ways both terrible and profound. We invented modern surgery because we needed to save soldiers, Sarah said. Developed penicillin because of infected wounds. Created the internet as a military communication system. Went to space partially because of military competition. War drove innovation even when we hated war itself. Lara listened intently, her dark eyes never leaving Sarah's face. The Vrynn evolved past warfare when our global collective consciousness emerged. We developed the ability to share thoughts and emotions directly, which made violence between us difficult. When you truly understand another's perspective, harming them becomes nearly impossible. That sounds beautiful, Sarah said honestly. It is, but we lost something too. Lara's fingers traced patterns on the table's surface. The ability to think like you do, to see every possibility, even the dark ones, to be truly creative in conflict. Be prepared for threats we cannot empathize with. Is that important? Sarah asked. The galaxy seems pretty peaceful. Largely, yes, but there are threats, pirates, as you know, rogue factions, the occasional territorial dispute. Nothing major, nothing that threatens galactic civilization, but Lara hesitated. Watching you play today, I realized something frightening. If a real threat did emerge, something that could not be reasoned with, something that truly wanted to harm us, we would be helpless. We have been comfortable for so long that we have forgotten how to fight for survival. Sarah considered this. Is that why you want me to teach you? Human strategic thinking. Would you be willing? Lara leaned forward. Not to make war, but to understand it. To think the way you think, to see the possibilities you see. The Vrynn Strategic Institute preserves our warrior traditions as history and honor, but perhaps they should be studying human traditions as a living discipline. I'm not sure humanity should be teaching the galaxy how to fight better, Sarah said carefully. That seems like it could go wrong in a lot of ways. Perhaps you should be teaching the galaxy how to think about conflict, Lara countered. How to be prepared without being aggressive. How to deter without seeking war. You said humans were peaceful now. How did you manage that transition? How did you step away from thousands of years of warfare? It was a good question. Sarah thought about it, trying to articulate something she had always understood intuitively. I think we got tired. We got good enough at killing each other that we scared ourselves, and then we met you, all of you. We saw species that had moved past warfare, that had found other ways to exist. It gave us something to aspire to. We chose to be better. Choice, Lara said softly. That is the key, is it not? You had the capacity for violence and chose peace. That is more meaningful than simply not having the capacity at all. They talked long into the station's artificial night cycle. Sarah shared stories her grandfather had told her, not glorifying war but examining it honestly, looking at the human cost, the waste, the tragedy, and the occasional necessity. S.H. Lara shared Vrynn history, the slow evolution toward collective consciousness, the way her people had transformed from separate individuals into a loosely connected network of minds. I envy you that, Sarah admitted. The ability to truly understand each other must make so many things easier. It does, but it also makes us vulnerable to those who do not share our consciousness. We assume everyone can be reached through understanding because that is true for us, but you humans know better. You know that sometimes understanding is not enough. As they prepared to part ways, S.H. Lara made a formal request. The Eternal Vigil will be stationed here for another week. Would you be willing to meet again? I would like to learn more and perhaps play another game. Not to win, but to learn, Sarah smiled. I'd like that, but next time you should teach me something about Vrynn tactics. I won most because you weren't expecting human strategies. If you adapted your techniques to account for them, you'd be incredibly dangerous. That is precisely what I hope to learn, S.H. Lara said. They exchanged contact information, a simple process of touching their respective datapads together. As Sarah turned to leave, Dr. Zelmoth approached. One more question, if I may, the Zenith scholar said. Why did you choose to play the way you did? You could have learned the game properly, played by the established strategies. Why immediately apply human warfare tactics? Sarah thought about it. Because that's what made sense to me. I saw a battlefield and I treated it like a battlefield. I saw an opponent and I treated it like war. She paused. I guess humans can't help but see conflict through that lens. It's who we were for so long, maybe who we still are underneath. That is what makes you fascinating, Dr. Zelmoth said, and perhaps a little frightening. Sarah left the strategy sanctum and made her way back through the quiet corridors of Crossroads Station toward the docking bay where the Wandering Star was birthed. Her mind was full of the evening's conversations, the implications and revelations. She had always known human history was violent, but she had never really understood how unusual that was, how much it set humanity apart from the rest of the galactic community. They saw humans as clever traders and skilled engineers. They did not see the warrior culture underlying everything humanity did, the survivor's mindset that shaped human thinking even in peace. Was that good or bad? Sarah did not know, but she thought about S.H. Lara's words, about the importance of choice, about the meaning of choosing peace when you understood war. The Wandering Star's common room was empty when Sarah returned. Captain Rodriguez was still out, probably would be until morning. The ship's AI acknowledged her return with a soft chime, and Sarah made her way to her quarters. She pulled up her personal terminal and composed a message to her grandfather on Earth. The time lag for communication was significant, but she wanted to tell him about the game while it was still fresh in her mind. Grandfather, she wrote, something strange happened today. I played a strategy game with an alien military officer, a Vrynn commander named S.H. Lara. It was meant to be a friendly teaching match, but I ended up winning using tactics from the battles you taught me about. Canna, Austerlitz, some guerrilla warfare concepts, basic combined arms doctrine. She paused, trying to find the right words for what came next. The thing is, they were amazed. Not just that I won, but that I knew those tactics at all. Apparently, most galactic species stopped fighting wars thousands of years ago. They play strategy games to honor their ancestors, but it's all ritualized, predictable. They've forgotten what real warfare looks like. Sarah leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen. It made me realize how much of human culture is shaped by conflict. We spent thousands of years fighting each other, and even though we've stopped, we remember. We carry all that knowledge forward, all those hard lessons written in blood. The aliens were shocked when they learned about human military history, the sheer scale of it, the depth of our strategic thinking. She typed for another few minutes, describing the reactions, the conversations with S.H. Lara and Dr. Zelmoth, the way the crowd had looked at her with a mixture of awe and unease. They called us dangerous, grandfather, not because we want war, but because we understand it so well. And I think they're right to be a little afraid. But I also think Lara was right about something else, that choosing peace when you understand war is more meaningful than never having known war at all. I'm meeting with her again next week. She wants to learn human strategic thinking. I'm not sure if I should be teaching alien military officers how humans fight, but I think she's asking for the right reasons. She wants her people to be prepared, not aggressive. There's a difference. Sarah finished the message with family pleasantries and sent it off into the communication network. It would reach Earth in a few days, and she would get her grandfather's response a few days after that. She imagined him reading it in his study, surrounded by his books and historical models, and smiling at the idea of his granddaughter teaching aliens about Hannibal's tactics at Cana. She pulled up a star chart, looking at the routes ahead. The wandering star would be leaving in 2 days, heading toward the threshold systems with a cargo of agricultural equipment. After that, who knew? The life of a merchant spacer was unpredictable. But Sarah found herself hoping their routes would bring them back through Crossroads Station. She wanted to talk with Lara again, to learn more about Vrynn culture and share more about humanity. There was something important happening here, some kind of cultural exchange that went deeper than trade goods and diplomatic pleasantries. A message notification appeared on her screen. She opened it, surprised to see it was from Commander Lara, sent just minutes ago. Navigator Chen, it read, formal but warm. Thank you for the game today and the conversation after. I have been reviewing the recording of our match with my senior staff. We are analyzing every move, every tactic. Lieutenant Vrynn commented that this changes our entire understanding of humans. You are not just clever traders or skilled engineers. You are survivors, shaped by thousands of years of conflict into something unique in the galaxy. I hope I did not offend by calling you dangerous. I meant it as a compliment, though I realize it may not have sounded that way. Humanity's capacity for strategic violence is formidable, yes, but what impresses me more is your capacity to recognize that ability in yourselves and choose to use it only when necessary. That is wisdom, not weakness. I look forward to our next meeting. Perhaps I can teach you something of Vrynn philosophy in exchange for your lessons in human strategy. I think we have much to learn from each other. The message was signed with a Vrynn honor glyph that Sarah's translator rendered as something like, with respect and anticipation. Sarah smiled and began composing a response. As she wrote, she thought about what Lara had said, about wisdom and choice, about being prepared without being aggressive. Maybe that was humanity's real gift to the galaxy. Not the ability to fight, but the knowledge of what fighting costs and the determination to avoid it when possible. But also the ability to fight when necessary, to protect, to defend, to stand against threats that could not be reasoned with. The galaxy had been peaceful for so long that most species had forgotten such threats could exist. Humans remembered. Humans had never forgotten. Was that a burden or a gift? Both, probably. Like most things about humanity, it was complicated. Commander Lara stood in her quarters aboard the Vrynn diplomatic vessel, staring at the holographic recording of the game. She had watched it 4 times now, and each viewing revealed new layers of sophistication in Sarah's tactics. The human had been playing a completely different game, not just executing different strategies, but operating from entirely different assumptions about what warfare was. Where Lara saw a contest of skill and honor, Sarah saw a problem to be solved using any available means. Where Lara valued elegance and proper form, Sarah valued effectiveness and survival. It was humbling, and more than a little frightening. Lieutenant Vrynn entered without announcement, as was his privilege as her second-in-command. "The crew is talking about nothing else," he said. "The human who defeated you. Some are saying we should be concerned. That if one human merchant navigator can outthink our finest strategic minds, what could human military forces do?" "A fair concern," Lara said, "but I do not think the humans want conflict. Everything I learned tonight suggests they are genuinely committed to peace." "Because they are afraid of themselves," Vrynn said quietly. Navigator Chen said it herself. They scared themselves with their own capacity for violence. That is not the same as being peaceful by nature. "No," Lara agreed. "It is better, A peaceful nature is a limitation. A peaceful choice is a virtue. She turned to face her second. I am recommending to the Strategic Institute that they establish a formal exchange program with human military historians. We need to understand their way of thinking, not to make war, but to remember how to think about conflict. We have been complacent for too long. Vikas made a gesture of agreement. The Council may resist. They will say we are borrowing trouble, preparing for wars that will never come. Perhaps, but I would rather be prepared and wrong than unprepared and surprised. Lara looked back at the hologram. The human showed me something tonight. She showed me that our ancestors' warrior traditions are not just history. They are knowledge that can be lost if we do not maintain it. And once lost, it may be impossible to recover when we need it most. You truly believe we might need it? I believe the galaxy is larger than we know, and we have been fortunate to occupy a peaceful corner of it for so long, but fortune changes. Lara closed the hologram. The humans found us after struggling alone on their world for millennia. What else is out there? What other species might we encounter, species that did not evolve toward peace? Vikas had no answer to that. Neither did Lara, but the question alone was enough to justify what she was proposing. There is another thing, Lara said. The human employed something in our game that I have been thinking about. She used deception, misdirection, psychological manipulation. These are not tactics we study because they are considered dishonorable in Vrynn tradition. They are dishonorable. Against other Vrynn, yes. Our collective consciousness makes such deception difficult and distasteful. Lara met his eyes. But what about against an enemy that does not share our consciousness? What about against an opponent who thinks like the humans do, who sees warfare as a problem to be solved rather than a ritual to be honored? Vikas understood. You are saying we need to learn to think dishonorably. I am saying we need to learn to think flexibly, to be capable of honor but not constrained by it when facing an opponent who does not value it. Lara moved to the window, looking out at the stars beyond Crossroads Station. The humans have a saying that Navigator Chen mentioned. If you wish for peace, prepare for war. It is ancient wisdom from their culture, and I think we have forgotten its truth. The Council will definitely resist that. Then I will convince them, with evidence, with logic, and with the recording of tonight's game. Lara smiled slightly. After all, what better proof that we need to adapt than the fact that a human civilian with no formal military training defeated our finest strategic simulation player in her first match? Vikas made a sound that might have been Vrynn laughter. You are using human strategic thinking already, turning your defeat into a weapon to achieve your objectives. Perhaps I learned more tonight than I realized. 3 days later, Sarah's grandfather sat in his study reading her message for the third time. Professor Michael Chen was 87 years old, long retired from his position at the War College, but his mind was as sharp as ever. The walls of his study were lined with books, military history, strategic theory, primary sources from conflicts spanning human civilization. He had taught Sarah these things as a child because he believed history should not be forgotten, even the darkest parts, especially the darkest parts. Those who forget history, he had told her countless times, are doomed to repeat it. But he had never imagined his lessons would have implications beyond Earth. He composed his response carefully. My dear Sarah, your message filled me with pride and concern in equal measure. Pride because you represented humanity well, showed the aliens that we are not just merchants but thinkers, strategists, survivors. Concern because I wonder what we have unleashed by revealing the depths of human military knowledge to species that have forgotten such things. You are right that most humans do not realize how unusual our history is. We think of ourselves as a warlike species moving toward peace. But from the galactic perspective, we are the only warlike species, the sole remaining practitioners of organized large-scale violence. That makes us unique. And anything unique is either very valuable or very dangerous, depending on perspective. Your commander Lara sounds wise. The fact that she wants to learn rather than fear is encouraging. But be careful, granddaughter. Knowledge is not neutral. Teaching strategy is teaching power, and power can be used for good or ill regardless of intention. That said, I think you should teach her. Not everything, perhaps, but enough that she understands human thinking, enough that the Vrynn can prepare themselves for threats without becoming threats themselves. There is a balance to be found there, and I trust you to find it. One more thing. You said they were amazed by your tactics, by the depth of human strategic thinking. But remember that tactics are only part of warfare. The deeper part is understanding why we fight, what we fight for, and when fighting is necessary versus when it is chosen. That is the lesson humanity learned the hard way. If you teach the aliens anything, teach them that. Professor Chen signed the message and sent it off. Then he sat back in his chair, thinking about his granddaughter out among the stars, building bridges between humanity and alien civilizations through the study of warfare. It was ironic. Humanity had spent centuries trying to move past its violent history, and now that history might be the most valuable thing they had to offer the galaxy. He hoped Sarah was careful. He hoped the aliens were wise. And he hoped that in teaching them about war, humanity might help the galaxy avoid the mistakes humanity had made. But hope, as he had learned in a lifetime studying military history, was never a strategy. It was only a prayer. The next meeting between Sarah and HFY took place 4 days later, again at the strategy sanctum. This time there was no crowd, no public spectacle. Just the two of them at a private table in the back, with Dr. Zelmoth occasionally joining them to ask questions for his research. They did not play tactical cascade again. Instead, they talked. HFY asked about specific battles from Earth history. Sarah explained them as best she could, not as glorified victories but as case studies in strategy and human nature. The Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans held a narrow pass against a massive Persian army, not because they could win but to buy time for others to escape. The Siege of Stalingrad, where 2 armies fought over a single city with such ferocity that it broke both of them. The Cuban Missile Crisis, where humanity came to the brink of nuclear annihilation and chose to step back. That last one is important, Sarah emphasized. We developed weapons that could destroy our entire civilization. We came terrifyingly close to using them, and then we chose not to. That choice, that specific, conscious decision to not destroy ourselves even though we could, that might be humanity's greatest achievement. HFY absorbed this thoughtfully. So human warfare always carried the shadow of extinction. You were fighting for survival in the most literal sense. For most of history, yes, wars were about resources, territory, survival. Later they became about ideology, national identity, economic systems. But always underneath was the fear that losing meant ending. Sarah paused. That's why we got so good at it. We had to. In exchange, HFY taught Sarah about Vrynn philosophy, about the collective consciousness that bound her people together, about the way they experienced reality as partially shared minds, about the way they had transformed warfare into ritual, and then abandoned even ritual in favor of pure cooperation. It sounds beautiful, Sarah said honestly, but also limiting. If everyone shares experiences and emotions, how do you maintain individuality? It is a balance, HFY explained. We are not a hive mind. Each Vrynn is still a separate person with private thoughts and experiences. But we can choose to share, to open our minds to others and let them see through our eyes, feel through our hearts. It creates empathy that your species achieves only through imagination and effort. But it also means you cannot easily hurt each other. No, violence against another Vrynn is violence against part of yourself. That is why we evolved past warfare. It became neurologically difficult, then impossible. Sarah considered this. What about violence against non-Vrynn? That is the question I have been asking myself since our game, HFY admitted. We have had little cause to consider it. The galaxy has been peaceful. Other species are different from us, but most evolved toward cooperation just as we did, through different paths. But you humans, you remind me that cooperation is not the only possible endpoint of evolution. We're cooperating now, Sarah pointed out. Humanity chose peace. Yes, but you remember how to not choose peace, and that memory might be valuable. They met twice more that week. Each time they shared more, not just military history and philosophy, but personal stories, cultural differences, dreams for the future. Sarah found herself genuinely liking Lara, appreciating the Vrynn's thoughtful intelligence and her willingness to question her own assumptions. On their final meeting before the Wandering Star was scheduled to depart, Lara made a formal proposal. The Vrynn Strategic Institute has authorized me to offer you a position as a visiting scholar. 6 months full compensation, lodging on Vrynn Prime. You would teach seminars on human strategic thinking to our military historians and current officers. Not combat training, we are not preparing for war, but theoretical education, helping us understand how humans think about conflict. Sarah was stunned. I'm not qualified for that. I'm a navigator, not a professor. You are a human who understands your own military history and can articulate it to aliens. That makes you uniquely qualified. Lara's expression was earnest. Please consider it. I believe this exchange could benefit both our species. You could learn about Vrynn culture and philosophy. We could learn about human strategic thinking, knowledge flowing both ways. I'd have to talk to my captain, to my crew. Of course, the offer stands for 1 standard year. If you wish to accept later, contact the Institute. Lara provided the coordinates and contact information. But I hope you will accept, Sarah Chen. I think we are building something important here. After Lara left, Dr. Zelmoth approached Sarah's table. The Zenith had been observing quietly, taking notes for his research. You are hesitant, he observed. Wouldn't you be? Teaching aliens about warfare seems like it could backfire in a lot of ways. Perhaps. Consider this. Right now, the galaxy's knowledge of human strategic thinking is limited to rumors, to incidents like the Krill Raiders, to isolated encounters like your game with Commander Lara. That creates fear and misunderstanding. Dr. Zelmoth's eye stalks focused on her intently. But if you teach them, if you explain not just the tactics but the context, the history, the hard lessons humanity learned, that creates understanding. And understanding is the foundation of peace. Or it gives them weapons they didn't have before. They already have weapons, advanced weapons far beyond what humanity possessed at equivalent technological levels. What they lack is the strategic thinking to use those weapons effectively. Dr. Zelmoth leaned forward. Would you rather they develop that thinking through trial and error, possibly in actual conflicts? Or would you rather they learn from human history, from 5,000 years of mistakes and lessons already paid for in human blood? It was a good point. Sarah had to admit that. I'll think about it, she said. Captain Rodriguez listened to Sarah's account of the past week with growing amazement. They sat in his cabin, sharing a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for special occasions. So let me get this straight, he said. You played a game, accidentally revealed that humans are the galaxy's only experts on warfare, and now an alien military wants to hire you as a consultant on strategy. Basically, yes. Rodriguez laughed, a deep belly laugh that filled the small cabin. Sarah, that's the most human thing I've ever heard. We can't even play games without accidentally being terrifying. Should I take the offer? The captain sobered, considering. That's up to you. The Wandering Star will miss you if you do. You're the best navigator I've had in 20 years. But this is bigger than our ship's navigation efficiency. He poured them both another drink. Humanity has been trying to figure out our place in the galactic community for 80 years. We're good at lots of things, but we're not exceptional at anything, except apparently warfare, and that's a complicated thing to be good at. Grandfather's message said the same thing, that we're unique, and unique things are either very valuable or very dangerous. Can be both. Rodriguez stared into his whiskey. I was Navy too before I went merchant. Did 2 tour with the Solar Defense Force. We trained constantly, ran simulations, prepared for threats that never came. And I remember asking my commander once why we trained so hard when the galaxy was peaceful. You know what she said? Sarah shook her head. She said, we train so that our children won't have to fight. That's the whole point of military preparedness, not to seek war but to prevent it, to be so clearly capable that no one wants to test you. Rodriguez met Sarah's eyes. Maybe that's what you could teach these aliens. Not how to fight, but why being prepared to fight helps prevent fighting. That's what Lara said, that they need to learn to think about conflict even though they don't want to engage in it. Then maybe you should teach them, but Sarah, be careful. Knowledge is power, and power attracts those who want to misuse it. Make sure the ones you teach are the right ones. They talked late into the night, working through the implications and possibilities. By the time Sarah returned to her own quarters, she had made her decision. She would accept S.H. Lara's offer. Not immediately. She owed the Wandering Star at least another 6 months, enough time for Captain Rodriguez to find and train a replacement navigator. But after that, she would go to Vrynn Prime and teach aliens about human warfare, not because she wanted to make them dangerous, but because she wanted to help them understand what humanity had learned through millennia of conflict, that the best victory is the one you never have to fight for, that strength exists to protect peace, not to shatter it, and that knowing how to fight is only valuable if you also know when not to. She composed a message to S.H. Lara accepting the offer, with the 6-month delay. Then she composed another message to her grandfather, telling him her decision and asking for his guidance on what to teach and how to teach it. Finally, she pulled up a game of chess against the ship's AI and played until exhaustion forced her to sleep. Old habits died hard, but maybe some habits were worth keeping. 6 months later, Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the Vrynn diplomatic transport that would take her to Vrynn Prime. Behind her, the Wandering Star was undocking from Crossroads Station, continuing its route with her replacement aboard. Captain Rodriguez had wished her well, made her promise to return if she got tired of teaching, and given her a bottle of that special whiskey for the journey. Ahead of her, somewhere among the stars, was Vrynn Prime and whatever the next chapter of her life would bring. S.H. Lara approached from behind, her footsteps nearly silent. Nervous. A little, Sarah admitted. I've been thinking about what to teach. There's so much history, so many battles and strategies and lessons. How do you compress 5,000 years of warfare into a comprehensible curriculum? You start with the truth, S.H. Lara said. The truth about what war costs, why humans fought, and why you stopped. The tactics and strategies will follow naturally from that foundation. My grandfather sent me his old lecture notes from his courses at the War College. There are hundreds of them. Then we will work through them together. S.H. Lara stood beside Sarah at the viewport, both of them watching the stars. You know, I have been reviewing historical records of first contact between our species. When humans emerged from your Sol system, many species were unsure what to make of you. You were technologically advanced but politically fragmented, peaceful but with visible military capability, eager to trade but cautious about sharing too much. We didn't want to seem threatening. You succeeded. Humans have been model members of the galactic community, but I think now we are beginning to understand the depth of that achievement. S.H. Lara turned to look at Sarah. You are a species that mastered violence so thoroughly that you understood its futility. That is rare. That is valuable. I hope I can explain it in a way that helps rather than harms. You will, because you understand that the point is not to glorify warfare but to learn from it. To take the hard lessons humanity paid for and share them so others do not have to pay that same price. The transport began its journey, acceleration pressing them gently forward. Sarah watched Crossroads Station recede behind them, becoming just another point of light among millions. She thought about the game that had started this, about the surprised faces of aliens who had never really thought about warfare as something to be studied and understood, about the conversations with S.H. Lara that had revealed how much humanity's violent history had shaped human thinking in ways both dark and valuable. She thought about her grandfather's words. Those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. The galaxy had not forgotten warfare so much as evolved past it. But evolution could go in reverse if circumstances demanded. Better to remember, to maintain the knowledge even in peace, than to lose it and have to relearn it in blood. Sarah Chen, former U.S. Navy tactical officer, merchant navigator, and soon-to-be teacher of strategic thinking to aliens who had never known war, smiled slightly. Maybe this was humanity's real contribution to the galaxy. Not technology or art or science, though humans excelled at those too, but the hard-won wisdom of a species that had fought itself for 5,000 years and somehow survived to choose peace. She would teach them about Cana and Austerlitz, about Thermopylae and Stalingrad, about the Cuban Missile Crisis and the 100 Years' War and the countless conflicts large and small that had shaped human civilization. But more importantly, she would teach them why humanity had finally stopped fighting, why they chose cooperation over competition, peace over victory, shared prosperity over domination. Because that was the real lesson. Not that humans were good at war, but that humans had been good at war and learned to be good at peace instead. And perhaps, in teaching that lesson to the galaxy, humanity might finally reconcile with its own complicated history, might transform thousands of years of violence into something valuable, not weapons, but wisdom. The stars awaited, and Sarah Chen, carrying the weight of human history on her shoulders, was ready to share its hard-won lessons with species that had never needed to learn them the way humanity had. It was the most human thing she could imagine, turning tragedy into education, transforming past mistakes into future prevention, offering violence's lessons in the service of peace. Her grandfather would be proud, and somewhere in the far reaches of Crossroads Station, Dr. Zelmoth continued his research, documenting humanity's unique perspective on conflict. The galaxy was learning that humans were more complicated than they appeared. More dangerous, yes, but also more thoughtful, more adaptable, and more committed to peace precisely because they understood the alternative so well. And that understanding, hard-won and blood-bought, might be humanity's greatest gift to the stars.